presentation on your display?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we are going to proceed with the notion with another central notion in social linguistics, and that is group of speech. Okay, groups, speech community. Now, before we talk further about this, I'm going to spend a moment to review about our discussion last week. Okay, so last week we discussed about one of the unit of analysis in sociolinguistics, and that is varieties. Okay, language varieties. So we talk about it. We talk about language varieties, what it is, and we also talk about how we define language and dialects from social linguistic point of view. How do we manage to differentiate them from social linguistic point of view? And also we talk about types of dialects and also other types of language variations. And in our last week's discussion, we cover style, both style and register. And just to remind you, let me ask you some questions. Most people, especially who are not sociolinguists, try to define language and dialects by seeing its mutual intelligibility. So what does it mean to differentiate language and dialect from the point of mutual intelligibility? What does it mean? Apa maksudnya? The attempt to differentiate language and dialect by seeing its mutual intelligibility. Apa maksudnya? Bagaimana caranya? Iza, will then please close the door. Thank you. Iya. Ayo, silahkan.
Ma'am, can I answer?
Who's speaking here?
Diva Aurelia, ma'am.
Okay, Rere.
Yes.
Okay, so Diva Aurelia is your full name.
Yeah. It means that if two speakers mutually understand each other, it means that they're speaking the same language, just different dialect. But if they don't understand each other, it means they're speaking two different language entirely.
Okay, right. So a lot of people assume or resume the way to differentiate language and dialects from its mutual intelligibility. And what it means is exactly what Mbak Rere has already mentioned before, right? If those speaking partners understand each other, then they are not speaking the same, they are not speaking different language, they are speaking the same, similar dialects, same language, only similar dialects, only different dialects. But if they don't understand each other, then they are speaking different language, okay? Now, this kind of conception then leads to a lot of misconceptions. Ya, cara untuk membedakan language and dialect dengan cara yang seperti ini itu leading to a lot of misconceptions. One misconception is that language is, to an extent, a larger unit, a much larger unit than dialects. And it is believed that dialects is the subunit of language, and thus, because it is a subunit variation of language, it is not equal or it is lower than language. ya. Jadi cara membedakan yang seperti ini itu membuat banyak miskonsepsi, yaitu miskonsepsi apa? Bahwa bahasa itu capaiannya itu lebih luas daripada dialek, dan dialek itu adalah subunit, ada di bawahnya bahasa, ya. Dan banyak miskonsepsi yang lain, seperti misalnya kalau dialek itu tidak punya privilege seperti bahasa. Jadi dialek itu seperti the local taste of a language. Seperti itulah, itu miskonsepsinya. However, sociolinguistics or sociolinguists in particular do not differentiate dialect and language using the parameter of mutual intelligibility. Jadi di sociolinguistics atau seorang sosiolinguis itu tidak membedakan dialek dan bahasa menggunakan parameter mutual intelligibility. What do we use? Apa yang kita gunakan? Apa yang kita gunakan? Lalu. Apa yang kita gunakan? Suara saya apa putus-putus ya?
Tidak, Mem.
Tidak ya? Okay. Karena I think my video quality is disrupted here. I'm afraid that my audio quality is disrupted too. Okay. So how do we differentiate? How do we as sociolinguists or people who study sociolinguistics differentiate language and dialect? Coba Utita. Mbak Utita, Muawinun, Nafi. Mbak Utita?
Yes, ma'am.
Oke. Bagaimana cara kita untuk cara sociolinguists melihat dialect and language? Mbak Utita, can you answer that?
Sebentar, Mem, masih.
Okay, let me ask others. Coba yang lain dibantu kalau ada yang bisa. Silakan. Okay, silakan. Siapa? Please speak louder, okay? It's because of the sound of the rain and a lot of background noises. I cannot really listen to you clearly. So please speak a little louder. Oke, siapa barusan?
Halo.
Yang mau mencoba?
Halo, Bu.
Yes,
halo.
Siapa ya?
Reno. Kurnia.
Reno?
Yes.
Okay, Reno. Yes.
Is my voice clear enough?
No, your voice is not clear. So can you speak a little louder? A little louder.
Hello.
Yes, Reno.
I think sociolinguists divide dialects and language using like socio-political views. So the language that has more value will be the standard language.
Okay. So yeah, I get the first part of your utterance, but I lost the last part. but I think you did that right. The way we define a language and dialect is by using a socio-political point of view. Okay, and Reno, can you please try to drop the rest of your explanation in our chat box?
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, that's true. Very good. So the language that has more value, that is perceived to have more value, to have stronger political and social value in the society, will be the one that is called language, and the rest is dialects. And so, as Max Weinrich stated, that what is really a language? A language is a dialect with Navy and Army. Navy and Army is, of course, an analogy for power, for backup of power, right? So whichever dialect that is perceived to have more or stronger political and social value is then language. Okay, so that's how sociolinguistics view language and dialect. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And we also covered about different types of language. Do you still remember what types of language that we can really see in community, in speech community? Apa saja types of dialects?
Is it regional and social dialect?
Yes, we have regional dialect, we have social dialect, and we have ethnolect. Yeah, a dialect that is used or that refers to a variation that's used by a group of people that share similar history. Okay, just like in English, English speakers, we have Latino speakers, and then the Chinese English speakers. Okay, all right, very good. Now, last week we talked about the unit of analysis, right? We talked about the varieties of the language. Now, we are going to try to talk about who are speaking those language varieties. Which group? How do we define the group of people who speak those variations? Okay, now, why it is important for us to define the notion of the group or the community? Wait, I need to go to the next slide, but our next, okay. So why it is very important for us not just to visualize the unit of analysis or the language varieties, we need to also be able to visualize and define the group who are speaking the varieties. Why? Because I think I've mentioned this very frequently in the class, that central to social linguistic study is the interaction between the language and the society. Okay, that is how the social structures in society is responsible for the language variety being used in the society. Okay, so the social structures in the society is responsible. If you want to account for why these people use certain language variations, then we need to know the social structures that happen within the community, right? So that is why it is important to first define who are these people. And one way to define it is by trying to understand the speech community, the concept of speech community. Okay? So here we go. I'm so sorry. Oh my God. Wait, okay? Please wait a moment. Okay. I'm so sorry. In the background, I can hear the Uti is, is scolding the grandchildren. Utinya sedang marah-marah, and I cannot help but get distracted. I'm so sorry. Okay, ya. Sekarang kita try to define speech community. Okay, so defining speech community is rather a complex process too. Kalau kita mau mencoba untuk mendefinisikan speech community, ya, maka it's also a complex process. We can often tell that we do not belong to that community. We belong to this community, but when we try to extract and explain which community we belong to or they belong to, it's a complex process. Okay? And that is why in sociolinguistics, to define speech community, using one perspective is not enough. Okay? If you want to get clear picture of what a speech community is, there are some perspectives that need to be incorporated to get a better visual of this group of speech or this community. What are the three perspectives? The first perspective that we need to incorporate is one, linguistic boundaries. But linguistic boundaries perspective is the weakest of all. Okay, and the second one is the perspective of shared norms. Okay, and then the third is what perspective can we use to define a community, a speech community, is by trying to look the relationship with other communities. Okay, before we talk about these perspectives, I want to also say that by its name, a speech community is actually a group that should consist more than one person. Okay, namanya juga speech community ya, berarti dalam komunitas ini seharusnya lebih dari satu orang. Ya, dua atau lebih lah. By its what the name entails. Number two is that how to define speech community is because it's a group, there should be something that binds them. Karena ini sebuah grup, pasti ada yang mengikat mereka sebagai sebuah grup, kan? Nah, apa yang mengikat mereka? What are the things that bind them? We can see by seeing the perspectives. These three perspectives in seeing a speech community. Okay, now let's go and try to take a look at the first perspective to define the speech community. What is the first perspective? The earliest perspective in defining speech community is proposed by Lyons. Now this quotation I got from Word doc, not from Lyons itself, but Lyons, as cited in Word doc, offered that speech community is all the people who use a given language or a dialect. Jadi Apa itu yang namanya speech community? Grup orang yang seperti apa? Yaitu satu grup yang share one same language or one same dialect. Okay, so yeah, this means that the members of the group are drawn together, are bounded on the basis of the same language or dialect that they use. Now, this perspective cannot stand alone. It is the earliest perspective and it has been contested. It has been criticized. Jadi, definisi ini tidak salah ketika mengajukan definisi ini untuk menjelaskan, mendefinisikan apa itu speech community. Tetapi, definisi ini punya banyak kelemahan. Jadi, tidak bisa berdiri sendiri digunakan untuk mendefinisikan speech community. Why? Apa kelemahannya? Kelemahannya adalah right now, if we use shared language atau same language as a parameter that defines or that binds people, then it's going to raise some questions and complications. What complications? One example in nowadays world where English has, for example, where English has become a global lingual franca, then English is not spoken in one specific region. Sekarang, apa kelemahannya mendefinisikan speech community menggunakan parameter orang-orang yang menggunakan bahasa yang sama? Nah, ini lemah. Kenapa lemah? Karena contohnya sekarang bahasa Inggris itu digunakan hampir seluruh orang di dunia. Because of its status, karena statusnya sebagai global lingua franca. Nah, apakah kemudian orang-orang ini, gitu ya, dan bahasa Inggris tidak hanya digunakan di beberapa daerah tertentu. Apakah kemudian orang-orang ini bergabung dalam, semua orang di dunia ini bergabung dalam speech community yang sama, hanya karena menggunakan bahasa yang sama? Jawabannya tentu tidak. So, ya, so that is why the first definition, the first perspective cannot stand alone. Okay? Nah, alasan yang kedua adalah a single speech community may have or may consist of a lot of different languages. Jadi anggota dari speech community itu bisa saja menggunakan lebih dari satu bahasa, bisa berbahasa lebih dari satu macam bahasa atau satu macam dialek. Ya, kenapa? Karena our communities right now have grown into a more multilingual communities. But still, even though there are different languages that are used in one community, there are still things that bind these people together, other than just the languages that are used. Tetapi orang-orang dalam satu komunitas ini, walaupun menggunakan bahasa berbeda-beda, masih ada yang membuat mereka itu menjadi satu. Ya, ada hal-hal yang bind them, mengikat mereka, selain dari bahasa yang sama. Nah, apa? That will lead us to the second perspective. How do we define speech community? And this is the second perspective. Defining speech community by looking at their shared norms. Okay, norma sosial, norma budaya yang shared. Shared itu berarti satu anggota dengan anggota yang lain itu punya pengetahuan yang sama dan melakukan norms yang serupa. Okay, now there is a need to focus on the fact that a given set of people do not just share a language. Jadi dalam kelompok itu mereka tidak cuma punya bahasa yang sama, but they perform and they evaluate each other in a social and cultural space according to a set of implicitly agreed upon norms of social behavior. Okay, jadi kita itu maksudnya saling evaluate, perform and evaluate each other, itu maksudnya seperti ini. Kita kan sering, misalnya ya, kalau ada anak yang dari Malang dari sini, ada nggak yang dari Malang? Tidak ada ya. Kalau di Malang itu kan terkenal sekali bahasa walian ya. Bahasa walian itu bahasanya dibalik dari belakang ke depan, bacanya reverted, gitu ya. Wah, tau kan di kera ikire kayak gitu. Dari mana? Teko di, I'm so sorry, I'm not Malangis ya. Tetapi penggunaan kera gitu kan artinya arek. Ya, kalau yang punya knowledge yang sama tentang norm menggunakan bahasa itu, mereka akan biasa saja. Mereka sudah tahu merespon, oh ya, itu artinya arek. Tetapi ketika you do not share the same norm, you might fail to understand what's going on there, and you evaluate other people based on that norms, right? You tell, oh, you're not from Malang, are you? Kamu bukan dari Malang ya, kalau nggak ngerti. Jadi, what is used to evaluate member of speech community is not by the language itself, but the social and cultural shared norms that is shared by the member of the community. Yeah. Defining speech community is done by using our communicative competence. Yeah. Communicative competence itu the extent of how we can fully understand and do and comprehend interaction. Okay, to identify shared sense of social norms in discourse, along with ideas about the social group identities indexed by various features of language. Ya, jadi shared norms itu bisa terlihat dari features of language that are being used, the varieties of language that are being used. Okay, these features and shared norms refer to specific group. Okay, for example, for people who come from Singapore, for example, and have Singlish vocabularies that might not be as much understood by people from the other speech community. Okay, for example, ketika kamu punya teman dari Singapura gitu ya, and you speak in English, and hey, see, I got new apa ya? I do not have anything new in my life. I mean, recently, so I got new things like this, and he said like, wow, so shook lah. So shook means so cool, right? Something that's for Singaporean Singlish speakers, for that community, it's easily understood. Then for others who do not belong and who do not share similar norms of language, you might be in a bit of trouble, right? Okay. So that is the second perspective, that we need to incorporate to define the speech community, okay? What is the next thing that we can use to define speech community is by reflecting the relationship of that given speech community with other communities. Okay? To identify membership within a community, it requires social cohesiveness. That is the feeling that they are bound together, which enable members to cut themselves off other communities in certain ways. Jadi cara untuk tahu ini speech community masuk dalam member speech community atau bukan, itu adalah caranya dengan membandingkan dengan speech community yang lain. Maksudnya membandingkan adalah, I know I do not belong there. Seperti itu. Ya, kadang kita kesulitan untuk mendefinisikan what's our speech community, tetapi kita tidak kesulitan untuk memisahkan diri kita bahwa I do not belong to other speech communities. So by reflecting the relationship with other communities. Okay. Now, in speech community, we also have something that we call as communities of practice. Nah, kalau communities of practice ini lebih praktikal, lebih bisa lebih bisa kita visualisasikan more tangibly, secara lebih jelas ya. So Eckert and McConnell-Ginnett define a community of practice as an aggregate of people who come together around mutual engagements in some common endeavor. Ways of doing things, ways of talking, beliefs, values, power relations. In short, practices emerge in the course of their joint activity around that endeavor. Jadi ada satu aktivitas yang menyatukan mereka. Okay? A community of practice is at the same time its members and what its members are doing to make them a community. A group of workers, for example, a group of workers in a factory, an extended family, an adolescent friendship group, a women's fitness class, a kindergarten classroom, and so on. So what are the practices that bind them together? In short, community of practice is a group of people drawn together doing similar linguistic practices driven by certain activities, though they may come from different groups. Okay, now what I would like to emphasize one more time is by this definition, one person can actually affiliate with different speech communities. Jadi satu orang itu bisa berafiliasi dengan lebih dari satu speech community, let alone apalagi communities of practices. Apalagi communities of practice, kita itu bisa engage dengan banyak communities of practice. Okay, so if you see the way you interact with people in communities of practice, satu orang kan bisa mengikuti bergabung dalam grup yang driven by group activities, gitu ya. Misalnya saya kalau di tempat kerja, ya. Please wait. So you, for example, may belong to different community of practices. So if you belong to different kinds of activities where a group of people gather for similar purpose and using certain linguistic variations, then you are a part of group communities of practice. Nah, social network. Okay. Now the network can get wider because of the development of technology nowadays. Okay. Now, it is no longer our network is no longer something an interaction that we can that we do and we meet face to face, but because of technology, we can make social networks that link people together, even though they do not really share, they do not really reside in the same area. Okay, how people in a social network are linked to each other is one way of viewing social groups as defined by times, frequency, constellation, and social interactions. Maksudnya ini apa sih? Maksudnya bahwa this social interaction itu membawa domain sendiri, membawa grup sendiri. Grup ini tercipta bukan karena interaksi fisik, tetapi interaksi yang terjadi karena perkembangan teknologi. Misalnya grup Facebook, atau misalnya Anda penulis di Kaskus misalnya, Ada interaksi antara Anda dan pembaca Anda di Kaskus atau in other social networking media. Ya. Okay. Now, honey, don't do that. I'm on the Excuse me, okay? Okay. Nah, sekarang we are also going to talk about the notion of social identities. Yeah. The notions of speech community, community of practice, and social networking in social linguistic study are pivotal. Kita perlu tahu apa itu speech community, community of practice, and social networking because they are related to the disclosure of identity. Karena these notions are important to help you to disclose individual identity. Now, what is social identity? What is identity? A key concept in the study of identities is that identity is not something you have. It is something you do. It is not something that you know from seeing ini bukan sesuatu yang bisa Anda simpulkan dengan mengetahui the inner thought of an individual. No, but by seeing the linguistic the linguistic behavior, the describable linguistic behavior of a person. Ya, karena identity is something that we construct. Identitas itu bukan apa yang kita punya, tapi sesuatu yang kita construct. Tahu ya artinya construct? Apa construct itu?
Bangun.
Bangun, ya. Sesuatu yang kita bangun itu kelihatan karena kita tunjukkan. Okay? So, the term identity is used to describe a primarily social rather than psychological phenomenon. Identity is not the source. Identity is not the source, but the outcome of linguistic practice. Okay? Thus, identifying social identity is done through the observation of discourse practices within speech community, community practice, and social network. Jadi, cara kamu untuk tahu identitas speakers adalah dengan melihat his or her linguistic practice in community practice, speech community, or social networks. Karena dari those linguistic practice, you know how a person, a speaker, tries to associate themselves. Bagaimana dia coba untuk associate atau affiliate themselves with certain speech community or certain community practice. Gitu. Karena dengan mempelajari, mengobservasi linguistic behavior, Anda itu bisa tahu identitas apa yang berusaha orang itu bangun, yang berarti dia itu berusaha untuk berafiliasi dengan komunitas yang mana. Seperti itu. Karena itu kita harus tahu the notion of speech community, social networking, and practice. Karena dengan mengobservasi linguistic behavior, we know to which community he or she tries to associate himself. Okay, nah, saya rasa that's the end of my presentation. Now, we still have time. If you have questions or if you want to throw some thoughts to be discussed here, please share with the class. If it's not possible to do that via the audio, you can also drop your questions and your thoughts in the chat room.
Ma'am, can I have a question here? Okay.
Okay,
it's
can
RC,
you
by the way.
please speak louder, RC?
What about this one?
Uh-huh.
Okay. If it's okay, can I ask now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. If it's actually a matter of culture, politics, and self-identification to differentiate between a language and a dialect, as what Reno said before, then enlighten me about this fact that I recently noticed last week after doing some readings about language and dialect. So here's the case. I hope you can help me understand this better. Modern Swedish and Norwegian have a high degree of mutual intelligibility, but are considered separate languages despite the fact that these two don't share the same language, while Moroccan Arabic and wait, what was the other one? Oh, Iraqi Arabic are not mutually intelligible, but they are considered two dialects of the same language. I mean, it's contradictory with the materials that you have just explained to us last week. Can you help me understand this from the perspective of sociolinguistics, ma'am? Like, I mean, I'm having a hard time, like, really. My mind was blown knowing this fact, but I haven't figured out what's going on here just yet. Thank you.
Okay, right. I believe that's because what Reno said earlier is not just what differentiate language and dialect. It's not on the point of how they perceive the shared culture. Okay, but the social and political interests. And I think there are a lot of examples of languages. They're actually the same dialects, very close, very understandable, but then they are claimed as two different languages. I remember in our last discussion, we also talked about language of Hindi and Urdu. So those languages, when they speak to each other, they understand. Very similar, but they refuse to be called as dialects. They want to be called as different languages. And what interests are actually lying behind this is the political tension. Okay. Urdu is spoken by the Muslim community in India, and Hindi Urdu is spoken by certain speech community of majority of Muslim in India, and Hindi and it's actually claims of two different languages because of religion, politics, and religion tension. Okay, so that is why. If you said, is it culture that differentiate dialect and language? Most of the time, it's not culture. They may share the same, very same norms. However, there is social and political interest that motivates these claims. Yeah. Because I believe what Reno said earlier is not the culture; it's the social political interest. Okay. Okay, thank you. Other
Thank you for the answer, ma'am.
Yes. What's that, RC?
Thank you for the answer. It really helps me a lot.
Okay, I hope that answers. Other questions?
Ma'am, saya masih bingung dengan perbedaan.
Okay, Adam?
Ya, ma'am.
Adam, can you please speak much louder, not a little louder?
Oke, ma'am.
Okay.
Saya masih bingung antara perbedaan yang shared norm sama yang first perspective and second perspective, ma'am.
Okay, first perspective dan second perspective. Let me ini ya saya ya perspective of linguistic boundaries and shared norms tuh ya.
Ya. Kalau bisa simple, ma'am.
Okay. Nah, ini Yang penting dalam penelitian sociolinguistics itu kan gini, sociolinguistics terutama studi tentang sociolinguistics itu kan berusaha untuk melihat apa hubungannya antara variasi bahasa dengan grup atau komunitas yang menggunakannya. Utamanya ada faktor sosial, struktur sosial yang seperti apa di dalam komunitas ini yang memotivasi mereka untuk menggunakan variasi bahasa tertentu. Ya. Nah, untuk itu sangat penting kita ketahui kalau kita tahu unit analisis kita dalam sosiolinguistik itu adalah variasi bahasa, kita juga harus tahu siapa orang-orang yang menggunakan bahasa itu. Komunitas ini siapa? Siapa komunitas ini? Oke, karena kan kita mau melihat mengapa komunitas ini menggunakan variasi tertentu. Nah, karena itu di sosiolinguistik penting untuk kita mengetahui atau mendefinisi atau menentukan batasan who are the community that we are talking to. Siapa komunitas yang sedang kita bicarakan. Nah, berarti sekarang yang harus kita definisikan adalah what is community? Apa itu komunitas? Speech community itu apa? Oke. Nah, kalau dalam sosiolinguistik untuk mendefinisikan speech community itu tidak bisa hanya dengan menggunakan satu perspektif. Kenapa? Karena ada beberapa kelemahan. Ya. Nah, perspektif yang pertama itu apa? Perspektif yang pertama adalah komunitas itu kan sekelompok orang yang tergabung dan terikat oleh sesuatu. Kalau perspektif yang pertama itu menjelaskan keterikatan itu dari penggunaan bahasa yang sama. Jadi, kalau ada komunitas yang menggunakan satu bahasa yang sama atau satu dialek yang sama, itu berarti adalah sebuah komunitas tutur, speech community. Tetapi pendapat ini tidak bisa berdiri sendiri, tidak bisa mendefinisikan komunitas tutur itu hanya dengan linguistic boundaries. Mengapa? Karena kalau kita mendefinisikan keterikatan komunitas dari hanya bahasa sama, yang mereka menggunakan bahasa yang sama, sekarang di dunia ini kita ada banyak orang yang menggunakan bahasa yang sama, tetapi mereka tidak tergabung pada komunitas yang sama. Contohnya penggunaan bahasa Inggris. Anda kan menggunakan bahasa Inggris. Orang yang berdiam di Amerika juga menggunakan bahasa Inggris. Orang di India menggunakan bahasa Inggris. Hampir semua orang di dunia ini menggunakan bahasa Inggris. Tapi apakah kita terikat dalam satu grup yang sama? Tentu tidak. Jadi itulah mengapa linguistic boundaries itu tidak bisa berdiri sendiri. Hanya karena menggunakan bahasa yang sama tidak bisa serta-merta membuat orang-orang tersebut dikatakan sebagai satu komunitas tutur yang sama. Nah, apa yang kedua, perspektif yang digunakan kedua, bahwa dalam sebuah komunitas, keanggotaan itu tidak hanya dilihat dari penggunaan bahasa yang sama, tetapi dilihat atau dinilai lewat norm yang digunakan bersama, norma sosial, norma budaya, norma berbahasa yang sama. Saya beri contoh. Misalnya, kalau gini, saya beri contoh. Saya dulu pernah punya mengajar, ya, dan mengajar bahasa Inggris. Selalu ada mahasiswa saya yang mau minta izin untuk ke toilet. Terus caranya minta izin ke toilet ini seperti ini. Dia datang ke depan, datang ke saya dan berkata, "Excuse me, miss, kamu ngerti nggak ini maksudnya apa?" Excuse me, miss. Excuse me. Ngerti nggak?
Mungkin ingin keluar.
Mengerti karena kamu punya Competence, kamu punya knowledge terhadap norma itu. And maybe you're doing that norm, you're sharing that norm. Tapi orang dari komunitas yang lain, kalau misalnya bayangkan kalau dia datang, kalau dia berbicara ya dengan Native American misalnya, dengan orang dari Amerika misalnya, terus mau ke toiletnya dia bilang, excuse me sir, mungkin orang itu tercengang. Yes, what do you need from me? What do you need? Is there a problem? Dia gagal paham karena dia tidak punya knowledge tentang norm seperti itu. Kalau orang Jawa kan normanya kalau mau ke belakang itu berusaha sedemikian rupa supaya tidak menyebut kamar mandi, toilet. Ya kan? Karena itu hal yang agak tabu. Karena itu menggunakan gesture seperti ini. Orang yang mengerti punya knowledge about that norm itu karena we are bounded by shared norms. Ya, kita adalah satu speech community because we understand, we have the knowledge of that norms and we also practice those norms. Jadi cara untuk mengetahui apa yang mengikat komunitas ini bukan hanya dari menggunakan bahasa yang sama, tetapi ada norma-norma yang kamu juga yang sama-sama dimiliki, sama-sama dipahami dan sama-sama dipraktekkan. Norma itu banyak ya, cultural norm itu banyak, tetapi kita bisa indikasinya kita punya knowledge enggak, kita bisa paham enggak, do we practice the same thing? Nah, itu yang membuat kita terikat terhadap satu keanggotaan komunitas tutur yang sama. Seperti itu, Adam.
Thank you.
I hope that answers.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Okay, ada lagi?
Ma'am,
Okay, yeah, I think we have questions in the chat room.
I still don't understand about community practice. Could you please explain it to me?
Which one?
Thank you. About community practice.
Ya, jangan Arvinda, jangan galau. Terus jangan galau, jangan distracted. Which one is Arvinda? Arvinda yang mana? Arvinda yang mana?
Maaf, Ma'am, Arvinda audionya bermasalah.
Oh ya. Ya, Arvinda ya, fokus. Anda perlu aku, saya kirim. Oke. Maaf ya, barusan siapa yang bertanya? Mbak siapa?
Utita.
Sebentar, Utita ya, Mbak Utita. Bentar, let me try to find you in this. Yes, Mbak Utita. What is that?
Could you explain once more about community practice?
Community of practice. Ya. Okay. Community of practice. Nah, community of practice ini sifatnya lebih pragmatic, lebih practical daripada speech community. Ya, ntar I really want to. Okay. If you're confused, I would recommend you to refer to the sorry, to refer to this, in short, okay, to refer to this easier definition. In short, community of practice is a group of people. Jadi ada sekumpulan orang yang drawn together, ya, drawn together, doing similar linguistic practices, driven by certain activities, though they may come from different groups. Jadi satu grup orang yang terikat. Nah, terikatnya karena apa? Terikatnya karena mereka melakukan certain kinds of activities, karena aktivitas tertentu. Misalnya ya, dan mereka mempraktikkan similar linguistic practices. Okay? Misalnya kalau yang community of practice itu apa? Misalnya remaja masjid, bukan? Atau on the other hand, we also have community of church. Kalau Anda pergi ke gereja dan punya komunitas gereja, ada aktivitas yang Anda lakukan dan Anda share certain linguistic practices, ya kan? Misalnya jargons atau register yang digunakan di gereja itu berbeda dengan jargon and register yang digunakan anak remaja masjid misalnya, ya. Atau apa misalnya kegiatan yang membuat kita menjadi grup. For example, if you work, I work as a teacher in my faculty or in my department. Yeah, that makes me belong to my community of practice is my workplace. Okay, my group, the other teachers who are interacting with me, not only teachers but also with students. Kamu juga bersama karena terikat dari sebuah kegiatan, yaitu kegiatan akademik misalnya, karena kamu mahasiswa sastra Inggris, that's community of practice. Jadi keterikatan atau group of people yang doing similar linguistic practices driven by certain activities. Though they may come from different groups, maksudnya selain menjadi mahasiswa atau menjadi bagian dari mahasiswa sastra Inggris, di luar mungkin kamu akan bergabung dengan communities of practice yang lain. Seperti itu kita. I hope that answers.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Let me check the chat. Wait, I want to copy. The last text, my bad. Alright. Comic strip. Ada yang bertanya tentang I want to copy my last text. But I just know that in Zoom we cannot copy. What last ini last text apa? Mbak Arvinda. Last text apa Mbak? Text atau task? My last question. What question? Oh, okay. Right. Comic stripnya ini. Comic strip tugas comic strip tetap akan ada yang bertanya tentang tugas comic strip ya. Tugas comic stripnya tetap kita akan laksanakan ya. Tetapi saya belum siap dengan instruksinya. Saya harus menyiapkan dulu instruksi yang jelas untuk comic strip ini. Ya. Jadi mohon ditunggu, mohon bersabar. The comic strip task, the project is on this semester. However, I still need some time to prepare for the instruction, for clear instruction on how you do this project. Oke, Mbak Arvinda. Ini tadi yang tanya Mbak Arvinda, karena Mbak Arvinda tanya tentang comic strips. Okay, it is now 4. Okay, sekarang sudah jam 4. Saya akan menggunakan sisa waktunya supaya Anda menulis waktu Anda untuk menuliskan summary of our discussion today. I've already Anda bisa attach your assignment on today's activity at MMP. I'm going to post this PowerPoint presentation also in MMP right after this. Ya, Arsi jangan membuat wajah yang aneh. You start to scare me. Okay. Okay, sudah ya? Let me stop screen sharing. Okay, it seems that you have no other questions to ask. Yes, Adam?
Boleh saya minta kontak person supaya ada yang lupa-lupa nomor telepon.
Okay, all of you, if you have difficulties and you want to ask questions, you can WhatsApp me. I don't mind. I'm not giving it to Adam only. I'm giving it to you all, just in case you do not know where to reach, how to reach me. Okay, so Adam, you can find it in the chat box. You can find my number in the chat box. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
If you have questions and I have the opportunity to answer, I will. Okay. And it's also for everyone. Okay. 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 Untuk hari ini, our session is going to end here. And please try to complete your summary on the given schedule. Okay. Thank you very much for your participations, for your attention, for your questions. I will see you again next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
ma'am. See you next week.
Thank you, ma'am.
See you next week.